Hi again, everybody. Welcome back to Sports Talk. Doug Miles, Don Henderson with you. I'm here in Sarasota, down up in New Jersey tonight. We had a busy weekend of sports. Lots to talk about tonight. We'll do some World Series talk, a lot of football, both pro and college. We'll talk some hockey as well. We'll be joined in a few minutes by our hockey expert, Jeffrey Payne. Also talked a little about Nebraska. They lost a tough game over the weekend. He is based out there. And a little later on in the show, we hope to talk to Pat Dooley, writer for the Gainesville Sun. He's written a book about the Florida Gators and their history, so we'll chat with him for a few minutes as well. But, Don, I knew you were a little traveling this week, and up in your other home, up in New Jersey. How are things up there?
Well, everything is great. The weather is spectacular, really. 57, 58 degrees yesterday, and again today. You saw the Eagle game on TV, the Eagles and Giants, really playing under optimum conditions. The game was terrible. The Giants won it, but Michael Vick re-injured that hamstring, and the Eagles were not in very good shape. So, but there were a lot of exciting pro games yesterday, as you said, and boy, we've seen a crazy World Series, haven't we?
Two of the weirdest plays, not just in the World Series, but any time in baseball. I've never seen an obstruction call at third base before. I've seen the catcher call for obstruction for a runner going to first, but I've never seen that before. Have you?
No, and I don't think anybody else has seen it either. And I thought Tim McCarver made an excellent explanation last night on the national broadcast on Fox. He said, this is a rule that the Rules Committee is going to go back and review after the series is over. It was called correctly, and I thought the coverage of it was super. On Major League Baseball, they had the umpires on, along with Joe Torre, supervisor of umpires, and they also had them on Fox, and they explained it very, very well, that even though it was impossible for the third baseman to get out of his way, there's no gray area there. You have to make the call as it develops in front of you, and quite honestly, he tripped over him, and there wasn't any. I thought they might have been able to contest it on the fact that he was not in the baseline, but they explained that as well. That the baseline is established by where you're running at the time. In other words, if you're going around third base, coming home, you have a lot of latitude to go in or out of whatever the area is. And that's considered a baseline. Well, the same thing on the inside. He had every right to be inside the bag, and unfortunately he tripped over the third baseman's legs or body, and they called the obstruction right away.
Yeah, I did not realize that obstruction. I always thought it had to be almost on purpose, that you were blocking somebody, but it looked like the third baseman was just down because the throw was wide. He was trying to dive to make the catch, and his legs kind of popped up. Now, you could say, well, was he lifting up his legs on purpose to kind of trip the runner? Who knows? But I always thought it had to be sort of an on-purpose thing. But any time that any type of obstruction, that's the rule. I didn't know that until I heard the explanation.
Yeah, they did a great job of explaining it and talking about the fact that it normally occurs, as you indicate, a catcher can have either catcher's interference or they can have obstruction, but it normally occurs at second base because maybe the throw is a little off, or somebody impedes the progress of a runner, and they call obstruction. Entirely differently than what we saw at third base, where really they had no chance to get up. I mean, he was flat on his face on the ground, but the call was correct. They had to make the call, and they did very quickly.
But to end the game, that's an oddity. And then yesterday with the pickoff play at first to end the game. I mean, two things that have never happened before in postseason, and to get picked off like that in that situation. Now, that rookie made a couple of good plays on Saturday night when he came in the game late, but that kind of erased all that by getting picked off yesterday, didn't it? Why?
Yeah, it had to be very difficult going into the clubhouse after that one, because his run, as everybody knows that follows baseball, means absolutely nothing. And plus the fact that the batter at the plate has more home runs in the playoffs, 17, I think, in his career, and 16 or 17, something like that. And you certainly have no need to be off the bag. You're only going to go station to station at that point, and there's no reason to be off the bag. But in all honesty, I I saw it once before in Philadelphia, not in a World Series, but in a playoff situation with the Phillies. Martin was on first base, and it was one of his rookie seasons, or his rookie season, and they were playing the Dodgers, and he got picked off to end the game too. I had seen it twice, once in Philly, and then last night.
Oh, so that did happen in the game before. Okay. I thought it did not happen in the postseason before. All right, so it happened.
No, it did. No, this was not in the postseason. This was in.
Oh, regular season. Yeah. Okay.
No, I think it was in the. I may be incorrect, but I think it was in the not the. Well, it might have been either the very end of the season or it was in the playoffs. I can't remember, but it was Martin who was the one that was picked off.
You know, Babe Ruth, he got caught stealing in a World Series to end a World Series. I forget who they were playing, but you wouldn't think Babe Ruth would be trying to steal a base, but he did. Got thrown out at second, and that was the end of that series. And whatever it was, 32, 33, whatever year that was.
Right.
So he did it.
Well, you don't expect to see something like that, but also you don't expect to see the obstruction play. There were a lot of really unusual plays in this World Series thus far, but to me, it's been exciting in the sense of the people that are watching the game, whether you're rooting for the Cardinals or whether you're rooting for, for the Red Sox. But it's been a sloppy World Series. I mean, holy smokes. You don't expect the two best teams in baseball to play this kind of, and even John Farrell said in the post-game interview, I don't know if it was last night or the night before, we better not throw the ball to third base anymore. And the one that they got caught on was geez, I'd love to talk to McCarver after this is all over and he gets back to Florida, because I thought that play should have been eliminated to begin with. Salty Amaka, in my view, had no chance to get that runner at the plate, and he had to come off and catch the ball. And I can't imagine. I don't know where he thought he was stretching to. His right or left foot, I can't remember now which one it was in the left-hand batter's box, and there's no way he could have caught that ball and got back to home plate and got the runner out. So, to me, I think it was a fundamental mistake by Salt Liamaka that he didn't come off, come out and catch the ball. And then last night we saw the same thing at first base when, you could have come off and made a catch instead of let the runner go all the way down to second. I mean, little things that you really don't expect to see in a World Series.
Now, I want to bring on our guest who's going to join us for the first 20 minutes or so. He's been with us many times before. Good friend of ours, not only on this show, but on other stations as well. Good friend of mine. Went to college with him back in New York, and he's based out in Nebraska, and kind of our hockey correspondent, college football as well, and other goings on in the Midwest. Of course, not too far from St. Louis with the Cardinals out there. Jeffrey Payne joins us tonight. Jeffrey, good to talk to you again. How are you?
Good, Doug. How are you doing? How are you doing, Don?
Outstanding, and I'd love to hear some of your observations from a lot closer to St. Louis than we are.
Yeah, it's an interesting series so far. Just bizarre. I caught the end of your conversation. I didn't hear all of it, but obviously there was controversy in Game 3. There's been some big plays that have swung the series one way or another, and this one may go the distance.
Midwest, St. Louis has always kind of been the team of the Midwest, going back to, its origins back on when radio was the only way people could hear baseball, and that was the stations that, carried throughout the Midwest. KMOX, I guess, was the flagship station. People in Nebraska, are they big Cardinal fans? Obviously, there's no major league team out there, but, you have a history of baseball out by you.
Yeah, it's interesting. There's some the fans rooting for either, because there are a lot of transplanted people here, being a university city. So there are people who are originally from New England, so they're rooting for Boston. There are people from the Midwest who are rooting for St. Louis. Of course, there are a number of people here who are fans of the playoffs, obviously, but the Kansas City Royals, and we're pleased that they showed improvement this year. So, it's a mix out here. There's no loyalty per se to the Cardinals.
Well, that's a little bit of a surprise. As Doug said, KMOX is pretty, for really most of my lifetime, a 50,000 watt clear channel station. And even when Harry Carey was on years ago, before he made his tricks around baseball, I would have thought your area would have been, even Kansas City wasn't there. They were in and out. Went from Philadelphia to Kansas City and then out to Oakland, and then they created a new one. But I would have thought that they would have been St. Louis Cardinal fans.
Yeah, it's interesting. And, being a college town, too, the emphasis here, and there's a lot of angst among the fan base here about Nebraska football. So I think that's superseding any thoughts about,
we're going to get to
that. World Series.
Anybody out there that doesn't have a red shirt?
Who doesn't have a red shirt? Well, they're outcasts if they don't, but there are a lot of people with red shirts out here, and a lot of red cars out here too. I know the insurance rates generally are higher auto insurance for red cars, but that doesn't stop people here from driving red cars.
Well, now they got a football team where everybody wears red as well, but in Kansas City's doing pretty well. So you got a lot of red shirts to sell out there.
Yeah, Kansas City, a number of people here will drive to Kansas City. It's about a 3-hour drive to Arrowhead. And they're off to, obviously a terrific start, 8-0. And they were the story of the NFL this year. The question is, can they sustain that? The schedule hasn't been all that tough. But you can't deny the fact that Andy Reid has totally turned around that franchise.
No question about that.
Jeff, I guess we'll ask you. I mean, you're a big Husker supporter out there. Tough loss to Minnesota over the weekend, huh?
Yeah, I mean, it was not a good game for Nebraska. It was on the road. Minnesota certainly had a lot to play for. They've got a coach who has had some time off from coaching due to his repeated epileptic seizures. And Minnesota certainly playing for their coach. They played well. They basically played Nebraska-style football. I mean, they ran the ball effectively, played good defense, and beat Nebraska at their own game. Nebraska's defense this year and also the end of last year has not been strong, and they have a difficult time stopping the run. And, football is still a relatively simple game. I mean, offense has evolved, but you still have to be able to stop the run on defense. If you can do that you can force the other team to become one-dimensional and you have a better shot. But right now, Nebraska cannot stop the run. And ironically, that was about most of what Minnesota had to offer. Because they were able to run the ball effectively, they were able to get their tight end in the game, and they were able to get a key touchdown in the second quarter on 4th and 10, pass over the top to a wide receiver who then went in to score. So Nebraska's having some struggles. Their quarterback, Taylor Martinez, had been out for 6 weeks. Some of the Nebraska faithful questioning why he stayed in for the entire Minnesota game because he's not 100%. He has injuries to his second and third toes. He also has an injury to his left shoulder. Clearly not 100% inside of his game, yet he stayed in for the duration. And during his absence, Nebraska's number 2 and 3 quarterbacks, albeit against some weaker competition, got playing time and played well. So, a lot of fans are asking some questions right now. And when you're out here and, it's not the only game in town, but it's one of the few games in town as far as sports are concerned, there's intense scrutiny that's focused on this football team.
Well, I'll tell you, I worked with Richie Ashford for a number of years, and of course he was from that area, and boy, oh boy, he lived and died every Saturday. No matter where he was, he followed the football game. So, it's almost a cardinal sin if you don't follow Nebraska if you're from out there.
Yeah, he's from a small town in Nebraska, actually. I think it's Tilden, Nebraska.
Yeah.
And
Tilden,
yeah. One of the great players. Played for the Mets, I think, in the famous Casey Stengel team of 1962. But, people, basically, I don't know if you've ever been out here, Don. Doug, you were out here many years ago, but it was during the summer.
Right.
But on football Saturdays, if you go to the grocery store, you're one of the few people in the grocery store, and playing on the public address system is the play-by-play for the game. So, I mean, this is serious, serious business.
Well, you're right about Richie and the Mets. Last year that he played, he hit 301, I think, that last year before he retired, and he was sort of the number one Met that particular year. Obviously, there wasn't much talent on the team, But it's interesting that we're going into, and the last 2 weekends have gotten us into a position because of the upsets that the last year, before we go into the playoff system, it's going to again be a little bit of a hassle as to what 4 teams are going to be talked about to get into the playoffs.
Right. And, they've put together a selection committee for that, 14 playoffs, and Tom Osborne, former Nebraska coach and athletic director, is going to be on that committee,
Right.
among others. What's going to be interesting to see this year, obviously, is the trend. Well, it's the last year of the BCS format, based on my understanding. Next year will be the playoffs. And what's going to happen here over time is 4 teams is not going to be enough. And if the FCS can have 16, why can't FBS have 16? You and I both know that comes down to money and the bowl system. And somehow, if they can maintain the interest in the lesser bowls, which right now there's not a ton of interest anyway, but there's certainly some money to be made. It'll be interesting to see how that all plays out. How do you incorporate a 16-team championship? Again, I'm looking down the road here because I would have to guess it's going to evolve into that. And how is it going to evolve into that and maintain some kind of bowl structure for the teams that don't make the top 16? Maybe it will be like an NCAA NIT type thing, or I'm not sure how it's going to play out, but I can see it going in that direction. I'm curious to see if you agree with me on that.
Well, I'll say one thing, Doug. Maybe you chip in on this because we've been in Florida for quite some time, and really, Tampa has done a terrific job. Setting up the bowl game on New Year's Day. They play in the daytime all the time, and they get the second-tier teams. They don't get a team for a national championship. And I have to say that the Outback Bowl, as long as I've been there, Doug, in the last 10 years, has really been very, very successful.
Yeah, the one this year, obviously, we saw the Clowney hit, and it's been played 1,000 times on every sports highlight show. That was a good game. Got a pretty good crowd, almost a sellout, and that has become really one of the of the second-level bowls. That's probably the top of that list.
No question about it. The year before, we were standing on the sidelines in the overtime game.
Right.
You still getting good teams that have the bowl games to go down. Yeah, sorry.
No, you're introducing you again, Jeff. Go ahead.
Go ahead, then. Sorry.
I was just like Jeffrey Payne joining us on the show tonight out from Nebraska. I just wanted to ask you, you talk about the Nebraska program. Bo Pelini got into a little bit of hot water earlier in the season. Is that all kind of settled down out there?
Well, I think, this is my informal survey of talking to people around here. Many people thought it was a low blow to release that audio tape, which was a private conversation, 2 years after it was sent. It was clearly somebody with an axe to grind against Pelini. Having said that, people here, I think, were offended by his remarks. Because so it's the kind of thing where if the team goes south, if they don't, the bottom line, whether a coach is retained or not depends on their win-loss record. And you tend to overlook some things when you're winning, but when you're not winning, these become add-ons. So you got to remember also that Bo, his first 5 years here, won 9 games in each of those 5 years, and not many programs can say that. So I know a lot of media outlets are saying he's on the hot seat, and I think it really depends on how Nebraska does in November. They have the meat of their schedule coming up. They have 5 games, 3 of which are at home. You win 8 games, you'll be pretty hard-pressed to let somebody go. And I think he'll turn this thing around. But, back to what you were saying earlier, that audio tape, again, many people felt, and I agree, that was a low blow, but people still are and were offended by the remarks that were made.
How about the conference switch? How has that been received out there?
What's interesting is that things changed here dramatically in the change from the Big 8 to the Big 12. In the Big 8, you had that classic Oklahoma rivalry, either on Thanksgiving Day or the day after. And, I didn't move out here. Our family did not move out here until 1991. So I had the pleasure of going to those games, at least the home ones, between 91 and 95. And once Nebraska joined the Big 12, what happened was Oklahoma was no longer on the schedule every year. and they're on the schedule 2 out of every 4 years. And so it never felt right for Nebraskans and Nebraska fans, the Big 12 conference. And part of it was Texas was throwing its weight around, and Nebraska felt, I think, that Texas wanted its own way, and Texas oftentimes got its own way. I'm talking about the University of Texas, and that ultimately led to the breakup of the conference, and obviously A&M went a separate way, and so did Missouri, and so did Colorado. So I don't think there was any love lost from the standpoint of the Nebraska fan base when Nebraska left the Big 12 to join the Big 10. I think culturally, and Tom Osborne has said this, it's a better fit for Nebraska to be part of the Big 10. From an academic perspective, the Big 10 is a strong academic conference from top to bottom, and there have been some benefits, a lot of benefits for Nebraska from an academic standpoint. A lot of times this isn't talked about. People look at, they moved to the Big 10 and talk about the athletics, but the academic benefits have been great because there's a lot of cooperation among the Big 10 schools academically that I think will benefit Nebraska. Yeah.
Doug?
Well, one of the reasons we always bring Jeffrey on, not only to talk college football, but he's a big hockey guy, and Jeff, the season's about 3 or 4 weeks old right now. About a week or so ago, I was flipping around the ESPN and happened to catch the replay. I don't know if you saw it, one of the 30 for 30 documentaries that are really very well done. The one about, which I thought was very interesting, I didn't know this whole story. I knew a little bit about it. The Islanders and the John Spano whole situation where he actually bought the team without having any money. I thought that was interesting. Did you happen to catch that?
I've read about it. I've read just some online articles about it. I did not actually see the show itself. Clearly there was not any due diligence done there. That Spano was able to get away with that. And that was, it's interesting because from what I've read, the story to some degree vindicates Spano, saying, well, all he wanted to do was, own this franchise and restore its glory from the early 80s. Well, it doesn't mean that you break the law to do that. So I have some concerns about that portrayal.
I did not see that show, but it's interesting to see how the teams are getting out of the gate. Ed Snyder, of course, here in Philadelphia is up in arms with what's happening with the Flyers because they have played so poorly that nobody expected that coming in at the beginning of the season.
They're doing really badly. Obviously, cost their coach. He left the job, and he's actually a good coach. I think someone has to start looking at Paul Holmgren soon, and probably will be.
They will.
Signing a lot of high-priced free agents. The chemistry doesn't always work out when you do that. And the Flyers are proof of that. And they're going to be up against the salary cap here, and it continues to be going forward. For example, Mark Streit they signed from the Islanders, who had a good 5 years with the Islanders, but he's mid-30s, and I think the Flyers signed him to a 4 or 5 year contract for big money. And Streit has seen his better days. He's still good on the power play, but 5-on-5, he's weak, or certainly weaker than he used to be. So the Flyers have made some curious free agent acquisitions, spent a lot of money. You look at their goaltending situation, Brizgalov is no longer on their roster, but they let Sergei Bobrovsky go to the Blue Jackets, and they signed Brizgalov to some tremendous contract, and of course that didn't pan out. So you wonder about their talent evaluation, and that's part of the reason they got themselves into this mess.
Well, excuse me, Doug. They fired their coach. Of course, he got into a little altercation with Ed too. It wasn't just a matter of what he was doing with the hockey team. But I make that a little bit analogous to what happened in Tampa a few years ago when they hired a coach, and he didn't last too long either.
Right.
Right. Yeah.
About 15 games is all he got. And they weren't in that bad a shape. They were only maybe 1 or 2 under 500, but
I didn't even think he lasted 15. I didn't think he made 15.
Yeah, it was maybe the end of October that they got rid of him. So,
right.
Yeah, I thought, Doug, you were going to ask me, and I'll bring it up since you haven't yet. I'm sure you'll probably get to it. But the Islanders made a big trade last night.
I think we should Buffalo.
Yeah, I think we should probably talk about that. So,
Don't do it.
What do you think? Well, I'll tell you what I think. When I saw it originally, I was really surprised. The Islanders thus far this season are one of the league's leaders in goals scored. Their problem is goals against. The Bachhoff has given them serviceable goaltending. He had a good game against Pittsburgh on Friday, but for the most part, other than that game, he hasn't given them goaltending that can basically steal a win. The backup goaltender, Poulin, has only played a couple of games, so there's a real question as to what kind of relief he can give to the Bachhoff. On defense, unfortunately, Vishnowsky is hurt. He had a concussion. They don't know when he's going to come back. Strike they lost in a trade, actually. They signed a contract with the Flyers. So they now have Matt Donovan from Bridgeport, who has not played well. I think he's -6 in his last 3 games. So if you look at the situation, you say, okay, it looks to me that goaltending and defense are the problem, and then the Islanders swing a deal and for more offense. Now, the deal could work out very favorably for them because Vanek is truly a superstar. Thomas Vanek for Buffalo is a tremendous player. He's never played with someone of Tavares' caliber, and so his game will probably elevate even further. The question is, how well will Matt Molson do without Tavares as he goes to Buffalo? But the keys to this trade for the Islanders are, number one, they gave up a first-round pick in 2014. I hear it's going to be a weaker draft, so that may be okay. It'll probably be a middle to late-round pick. They're also giving up a second-round pick the following year, 2015. But if Vanek doesn't sign with the Islanders at the end of the season, essentially the Islanders have given up Molson, a first-round pick, and a second-round pick for nothing. And Vanek right now has a $7 million, $50 million 7-year contract, which is up at the end of the season. So the Islanders have to do the best they can to sell Vanek on staying with them. But Vanek has expressed an interest previously in going to Minnesota, where he played college hockey. Now, the one thing going the Islanders' favor, or a couple things. One is to play with Tavares is a real great opportunity because he's one of the great up-and-coming players in the league. Plus, Vanek is a good friend of Michael Grabner, who plays for the Islanders, who's also from Austria. So the Islanders have to do a heck of a job here selling Vanek and staying with them. Otherwise, this trade will be in the negative column.
A disaster.
Yes. Yes. In other words, I was saying it in a politically correct way, but you basically described an unmitigated disaster, correct?
Just
at least Mike Milbury
one
didn't make the trade.
Yeah.
Mike Milbury didn't make the trade, though, right? Well, Ross Snow did. Your second trade, right?
Yeah, we'll see. I mean, he's made some good moves, but this one I was scratching my head last night. This has tremendous upside because if Vanek signs with the Islanders, you've got a star on the wing. Now, Molson was a very, very good player. Vanek has potential to play beyond Molson's ability, but you also have to look at the stats. Look over the last 4 years. Molson's aggregate point total over the last 4 years is marginally less than Vanek's. I mean, it's a few points. It's not that different. So, again, you look at this trade also, though, that maybe they could have waited longer because the whole league is aware that Vanek is a free agent at the end of the year. As the season goes on, you're more likely to get a better deal out of Darcy Regier, who's the Buffalo GM. But I think the Islanders have started off rather sluggishly. They're 4-4-3. And Snow, as you said last night, is he felt he had to make a move to shake up the team. But we'll see.
Well, I listened to the Jersey Devils game coming down Saturday night. Brodeur won his first game, and they were talking about the home stretch for him. It's getting closer and closer to the end of the picture. All the honors in the world, all the accolades you can get, but how much longer is he going to last? The Eastern Conference seems to have a lot less talent than the West.
It's interesting because we had this very conversation from a different perspective over the summer when they announced the divisional and conference realignments. And what I said was that, well, there are 16 teams in the East and 14 teams in the West, and I was looking at it purely statistically. I said, well, it's going to be tougher to make the playoffs in the West, in the East and the West because, 8 out of 16 make it versus 8 out of 14. Well, you look at the quality of the teams in the East, and the Islanders are 4-4-3, and they're in the thick of things. They're really, at this point, the Penguins look strong. Boston, Toronto, that's about it in the East.
Toronto got off to such a great start. We don't know about Toronto yet, but I mean, you're right. They last year, remember, they were a disaster early in the season. I remember Doug and I being, in Tampa watching them play. We didn't think they were going to win anything. They got a little better as the season went along, but This year they came out of the gate flying.
Right. And they've come down to earth a little bit. But you look at the West, San Jose is off to a terrific start. In fact, the only game they've lost was that game to the Bruins the other night with 0.8 seconds remaining. And San Jose completely dominated the Bruins. They look strong. Chicago looks strong. St. Louis. Those three teams, you still have Los Angeles out there. So you've got a Western Conference that is much stronger than the East. And, whoever emerges from there obviously may not be 100% by the time they get to face the Eastern Conference champion. And the other thing, of course, is this is the year of the Olympics. So, teams with lots of talent may be at a disadvantage when it comes to the Stanley Cup playoffs because of the number of games that the players will have.
Colorado too, Jeffrey, with Patrick Waugh becoming the coach.
Right.
Off to a great start, and he got almost little fisticuffs with the Anaheim coach early in the season. How you saw that? I think he knocked some of the parking glass over trying to get at him.
He tried to Mr. Bruce Boudreau, as a knee to knee out of the Colorado players. Yeah, and the thing about that is, it's interesting how well Colorado's played. I think they've only lost one game thus far. I think
they're 8-1 and whatever.
10-1. Yeah, 10-1 now. And actually, by the way, Minnesota's 6-3-3, and St. Louis is 6-1-2, and Anaheim is 9-3, and Vancouver's 8-4-1, and Phoenix is 7-3-2, and LA is 8-4. I mean, so looking at a Western Conference that's very strong. You look at the Metropolitan Division where the Islanders are in. The only team above 500 is Pittsburgh at 7-4. So definitely a balance of power out west. But you wonder, after Patrick Waugh went berserk and Boudreau called him, Bush League essentially, and really was critical of Waugh, maybe the players looked at that and say, geez, we better play good hockey because this guy might, go off on us.
Well, the one difference between the Blackhawks and the team that won the Stanley Cup, 3 years ago, they had to shift their players because of salary. Scotty Bullock's son does not have to do that with this team. So this is basically the same team with the exception of one or two players that went last year all the way.
Correct. And I think this will be different. Their likelihood of repeating is obviously stronger than it was, 3 years ago. However, you look at how deep that Western Conference is, it's going to be tough getting out of it.
Yeah. I agree with you 100% on that.
The Rangers, as we do the show live on a Monday, they played their first home game. They did like they did last year with the long road trip as they refurbished Madison Square Garden, part 2 of that project. So they had to play the first 8 or 9 on the road, and now they play Montreal tonight. But they've gotten off to a shaky start. Lundqvist has not played well early in the year, but now they only have to play, 31 more road games the rest of the season. So they'll be, top-heavy at home the rest of the way. That's got to help.
It's got to help. This team really depends on Lundqvist, as you know. He's one of the premier goalies in the league. If he doesn't play well, they're really in trouble. They've given up 33 goals in 9 games. It's not good. They've only scored 15. They've also in transition, new coach, new system. But you look at the New York team. Yeah, Nashville, that doesn't help.
The one thing that Doug said a second ago, the refurbished garden, I saw it tonight, to be honest with you, and it's pretty spectacular. But at the same time, they're trying to build the Rangers, build the Knicks, build Madison Square Garden, and make it the focal point of the NBA and all the National Hockey League, more so than they have done in the last 10 years.
Yes, and we'll see if the Rangers can parlay that into some wins as the season goes on. The other thing, I think you mentioned about Rick Nash, Doug, but come playoff time, that guy does not seem to come through. He did not have a particularly good playoff a year ago, and we'll see, what he can do. He played for Columbus his entire career. He only had one playoff season, I think, with him in the roster. They're never able to move to the next level. The question is he the kind of player that can help carry the team on his back to bring the Rangers to the next level? I don't know if he's the guy to do that. By the way, I'm looking at the standings here. I see Tampa Bay is in first place at 8-3, and that must be perhaps a little surprise to you guys in light of how they did a year ago.
Well, we sort of thought they were going to make not a dramatic move, because it was interesting that they followed the exact same formula that they did 3 years ago by bringing somebody within the organization up who really had had a lot of experience as far as coaching at the National Hockey League level. So there were a lot of eyes looking to see whether or not this exact same move that the general manager had made 3 years ago turns out to be better than what he did then.
Yeah, and Tampa Bay scores a lot of goals. You know, that's the thing.
Right.
They give up a lot of goals, but they score a lot of goals. And, you know, so they've got a talent on that team. We'll see if they can continue this. They've won 3 in a row now, see if they can continue that. It doesn't hurt having Stamkos be about it.
No, not at all.
I was saying, Jeffrey, your favorite goaltender, Rick DiPietro, I believe was having a tryout with Carolina this week. I didn't hear how he did, but he may be back in the league, huh?
Well, he's going to be playing in the American Hockey League. He's signed a contract to play with their AHL team, I think it's Charlotte.
Right.
And so we'll see how he does. You know, it's interesting, the whole Rick DiPietro saga. We'll go down to history.
That's why I brought it up.
He brought up the series of maneuvers that Milbury made. He traded Luongo, obviously, and then drafted DiPietro in a curious move. And then, of course, DiPietro was rewarded with a huge contract, which he's never been able to fulfill. The Islanders will be paying him until, I think, 2027 or 2030, something like that.
They've got a lot of players in that category.
Buyout, you extend it, right? So they extend the length of the payout, right? So they
because I think
25-year contract now.
Yeah, because it's another 18 years. I think the last 9 years are 17.
Right. Yeah. So these long-term contracts have to come to an end, both in all sports, not just the National Hockey League. It's going crazy with long-term contracts, but. Going back to your point a minute ago, I did a show with Phil Esposito last week, and Phil Esposito was convinced that the game, the American public wants to see more scoring, that's got to be the answer to bringing hockey up into the forefront of the 4 major sports. And he said defense is going to be something of the past. That everybody's going to, all the defensemen are going to be shooting defensemen. A defenseman is no longer going to be somebody that's going to be working on the National Hockey League. You got to be able to score.
I agree. And the thing is, we're almost like in a dead puck era here, you know, because scoring has actually been declining. You know, after the lockout in 2005, they made some changes to improve offense, but it has not continued. The teams are scoring less. And, you know, part of the problem is the players are too big, and the ice surface is the same size. And I would like to see an international rink. You know, for the National Hockey League games, but the teams won't do that because they're going to lose seats.
I was going to say, that's basically impossible now because the arenas aren't fit for that. The international rinks are just too much bigger.
Right. I'd like to see the game opened up myself, too. But there's certainly less clutching, grabbing, and, of course, the Devils didn't do much to ingratiate themselves with that left-wing lock, you know, they used to do.
Right.
And you know, that's boring hockey.
Yeah, Red Wings is very boring hockey. They're very dull. Yeah. Unless you're the fan of that team winning, but other than that, it's not exciting.
Well, the dullest of all was the Jersey Devils. I mean, you didn't get all they were was defense.
That's right. And then the other thing is, of course, the goaltending equipment has gotten bigger over the years. I know the league is looking at that as well. The goaltenders, you know, with their equipment take up a lot of the net.
Right.
And you know, the league did make some changes, you know, getting rid of the center red line helped in terms of speeding up the game. But you look at the goaltenders nowadays, to score a goal, you basically have to put pucks on the net. You know, this, you know, pretty passing and, you know, nifty moves or an extra pass, that doesn't do it. You got to put the puck on the net, hits the net, simple game, you know, go for the rebounds or deflections, what have you. And the teams that are doing that are much more successful. If you try to make that perfect pass, that perfect play, it usually does not end in a scoring situation. But I'd like to see the game open up as well.
Phil talked a little bit about the new rule. He was not necessarily in favor of the chase on the icing. He was not 100% in favor of that, but he said after watching the exhibition season and the early part of this season, you know, he has changed his mind. He's in favor of it now.
Yeah, I think purely the hybrid icing rule, I think purely from the standpoint of player safety, I think is a good idea.
Right.
You know, and so I think from that standpoint alone, it makes sense. You know, they thought about doing, you know, strictly, you know, what they do in college hockey or the Olympics, where crosses the line behind the goal, and then icing is whistled immediately. But this is sort of a hybrid situation. I think it makes sense. It seems to be working so far. If it reduces player injuries, all the better. And the thing is nowadays these players are so big, and the equipment they wear too. The elbow pads, the shoulder pads. They're hard. So you want to try to avoid particularly head injuries that have long-term manifestations.
And so does boards when you go into them.
Right. They don't have too much either.
Well, Jeffrey, I know Joey's got dinner waiting for you. We always keep you longer than we say, and we could talk hours on hockey, but thanks for joining us again tonight. Let's do something again maybe before the end of the year and get kind of a mid-season update if you're around.
That sounds good. I'd be happy to do that. It's always good talking to you guys, and hopefully the viewers find it as exciting as we do.
We'll college too. We'll get some bowl. We'll know the bowls by the end of December, so we'll do something around that.
Sounds great. Well, take care, guys. We'll be in touch.
Thank you very much.
Jeffrey Payne joining us on the show tonight. Always good to talk with him, and knows his Islanders very well. Knows his hockey, Don.
Yeah, he follows it very closely, and when you pretty much isolate on one sport, it's always great to get somebody that does that, because you and I talk about...
The number you have dialed has not been recognized. Please try again.
I don't know if that's you or me.
That's me. We're trying to get our next guest on, but we can try in a second here. In the meantime, let's bring on G-Man. G-Man, is that you?
Yeah, gentlemen, they're having some phone problems. I keep losing, keep breaking up, but
That's our producer. We have to be sure that we have the right guy producing the show and keeping us on the right track.
He's probably underpaid, knowing Doug.
Well, as soon as I
dial it as up.
As soon as I finish the show, I'm going to give my grandson a call because he's a big Red Sox fan. So as soon as we finish the show, I'll call him and see what he thinks about game number 5 tonight.
Brent, my sympathies, Ray. So, we have to come to the game tonight because of the fact he's a Red Sox fan.
He lives and dies with those Red Sox.
Well, I tell you what, I told Doug in an email when I got ticked off about that one of the games. I said you can't pull guns and you can't pull McElroy. Right now, what did they do? They bring Gummers back, and what did he do? Yeah. Okay, so he hit the home run and won the game for them. So I don't know where the series is going, but one of the things I wanted to say, you guys probably already know that, but it's a real rarity for top teams to meet in the World Series. Boston and St. Louis are the first since 1999, and guess who played 1999? Oh, yeah, New York Yankees swept Atlanta. And I have not been, and from 1903 through 1968, the top teams only met. And I have never, ever been, and Doug can tell you that, a wild card fan. But I thought that was pretty interesting that this is the first team since 1999 that would meet in the World Series. So a little bit of info, you probably already knew that. So
Well, Doug and I chatted a little bit about these two teams and the fact that they, just as you indicated, they were considered to be the two best teams in both leagues. But you wouldn't know it by the caliber of play of this World Series. I mean, there have been a lot of World Series in my lifetime, but I've never seen as many fundamental mistakes for two great teams playing one another as we've seen in the last 4 or 5 days.
Well, let's clarify something, first of all. These may be the two top teams, but they're not great teams by any means. And, I can't use that word in any way, shape, because I'm not a fan of either one. But not only are they not great teams, but where did they come up with these high school umpires anyway? I'm just curious. Have they been cutting the salaries of these umps lately? I don't know. And I'm sure all of you have seen that play at second base. That was great. That was a good call, right? And
well, poor Demuth had a bad night, no question about that. I mean, you could have been sitting in the center field stands. You could have made that call. I mean, that was a shame. That was just totally missed. I mean, I can't understand how you can be that close to the play, looking straight at it, and make that call. I mean, it doesn't make sense.
Yeah, it doesn't. When I was umpiring for Little League, I had several calls at second base, and I can tell you what, I never missed a call like that one, and that's kind of why I was kidding about high school umps. But I've seen a lot of bad calls, a lot of bad pitching calls. I thought that were outside or low or high. And some of the things that are going on with these guys, I don't know. All year long it's been like this. And we were commenting about calls earlier on the show. And, you know, and I have made statements about umps not only in the MLB but also in the NFL. So, and I can't comment on hockey. I haven't seen enough hockey. So you guys know more about that. So.
Mr. Magoo could have made that call, Don. Well, your favorite
Yeah, I mean, it really is when you look at it. When you look at it realistically, it's very, very hard to see how he missed that call. I mean, the ball didn't even go in his glove. It caught him on the edge of the thumb. Yeah, it caught him on the edge of the thumb and the first finger, and there was no transfer. There was nothing. He never even had the ball. And boy, that's very, very difficult to see how he missed that call.
I'm thinking if he had glasses on, he should have right there in front of the crowd taken the glasses off, held them up to the sky, and then act like he was waving them.
But I won't say this to you, man. Doug and I talked a lot about it. The call that they made, in Game 3, they had that call. They had that call right away. They called the interference right away, and they were right on top of that play all the way. In fact, even the home plate umpire looking down realized that they had called him out. So even when he slid in the home plate, he said right away, he pointed to third base and said he had already made the obstruction call.
Yeah, the heck with them on it. It's not an obstruction call like that, Nate. I mean, this is getting goofy. So anyway, I didn't like that call particularly, but I could be wrong. But what a way to end it. To me, that was a make-up call. Like in basketball, they'll have these make-up calls where they have a basketball, so they find something that's so narrow that hasn't been called, and it's a make-up call. So now
that wasn't the case. They called that 100% correctly, and they explained it in the post-game show as to what the official rule was in that situation. I have to say, in all honesty, I was very familiar with obstruction, but not in the way it was called in Game 3. So I got to give them a lot of credit. They made the right call under very difficult circumstances.
Well, I'm happy for you. And the same circumstances, it's just how often do you see that? And that was a rarity. Okay, I'll back off on that. But, hey, I understand the NFL now is moving to London.
They want to play 8 games there. I saw that today. They want to do 8. I don't know if it's going to be 8 different teams or they want to move a team there eventually. I think that's the idea.
Oh my gosh, 8 games over there?
That's what they floated today. That's what they're looking at, yeah.
Well, they have some games in China and Italy and have some games, forget about over here. I mean, what the heck? 8 games over there. I thought it was only going to be 3. So I was just going to joke
I'll
about
tell you,
it.
all they had to do was to send that giant eagle game over there, and they would never want them back. So, and they get
go over the Jacksonville-San Francisco game. That was no treat either.
Same thing. Send Jacksonville over there. Send the Eagles over there. They won't last long. They won't last long if they have those games to look at.
Jacksonville actually make money on the deal because the league kicks them the difference they make between, losing a home date and what they would sell, but they sold more tickets in England than they would in Jacksonville. So the Jaguars make money on the deal.
Right.
Oh, good. Well, anyway, guys,
I was going to say, you got Jeff Gordon, huh? Doing it yesterday.
Yeah, it's the same guys over and over again, but it was good to see Jeff win. He hadn't won for a long time, and of course that particular track is the shortest track, and when you have 500 laps, you can repaint half your house. But the 500 laps on a track that needs to be redone, repaved. The abutment area was really bad. That one turn before you come into the pits there, they had all kinds of spins and what have you. It was an interesting race. It was just long and boring, I thought. Now they got Texas next. Danica, of course, she finished in her same position, and I won't clear back in the back. I tell you what, I didn't see a whole lot of sports this weekend because every time I turned on the channel, I got a team of analysts, and then when I turned another channel, I got a team of announcers, and I turned another channel, and I got advertisements. So I spent the weekend flipping between those, and occasionally I would catch some sports. But I did watch what I thought was fun. You guys will think this is funny, but I did watch the Toyota Invitational Metal Yellow National Drags. And I watched the John Force team and the funny cars, and I watched his daughters in the races also, and I watched his daughter in the AA Fuel. And I tell you what, Danica doesn't have anything on John Force's daughters. If you haven't seen them, you got to watch it sometime.
I didn't look at the standings, Doug. Did you? Where did Danica finish this week?
Let's see, she at one time she got up to about 20-something. I thought she finished in the 30-something bracket there, like 30. Maybe I'm wrong on that, but for some reason I was watching with the chase standings, and that was important. With Kansas and Jimmy Johnson are tied for the chase for the championship. And Jeff Gordon's in the third, and I see the cutoff there is about 30-some points. But we'll see what happens here in the next three. Got 3 races left. You got Texas coming up next. Yeah, but I'm not crazy about Martinsville track. That's a terrible track. That rubber on there just changes throughout. So a lot of issues. A long race. Gee whiz, huh? 500 laps. But
I want to leave a couple of minutes to Don and G-Man. Don, especially you, I just want to remember a couple of minutes to one of the great sportscasters from up in New York. He passed away the other day. Since we talked, Don, Bill Major. We kind of emailed a little bit about that. People up in New York remember Bill from his work on
92 years old.
There. Yeah, 92. Yeah, one of the really original sports talk guys. One of the first to do an actual sports talk show.
Yeah, on WNBC in New York, and he was one of the first ones. Came down from Buffalo and did some work with the Knicks as well, and then as you and I talked about, it was really the first in-depth television sportscast between 10:30 and 11 o'clock, he and Lee Leonard did a great show, and I'll tell you. 92 years old. He worked till he was 88 or 89, and got to give him all the credit in the world. He was a pioneer in this business.
Sports Extra was the name of the show.
Right.
Sunday nights, 10:30 before ESPN. That was the show. You got in depth to the highlights. You got the Jets. You got the Giants or whatever teams were playing. In depth stuff. John Dockery was kind of the field reporter, and of course, Bill Major did his trivia thing. They always tried to top him on the end of the newscast every night. Nobody ever seemed to be able to do it. And it was always a great talk show host on radio, doing not only sports. I think he did some politics later in life. And I remember when he did the CBS hockey game of the week before NBC got it. I remember him doing some of those games. So he was a play-by-play guy too.
He did a lot of different things, and as I say, when he first came down from Buffalo. And NBC started the first talk shows, sports talk shows. He was on every evening I think 4-7, or I think that was either 3-6 or 4-7. I can't remember what it was, but did a real very very solid job, and he was really the forerunner of what we all did after that.
And did it in a way that was conversational. He wasn't a screamer. It's like a lot of these guys are today. He would talk to you. It was talk radio when it was talk radio.
Yeah. He got into a little hassle with Casey Stengel in the early days. I remember that.
Oh, did he really? Yeah.
Oh yeah, he got into it. But that was the only one I really remember with it that they got mad at him. I can't remember what exactly happened, but there was something in there that happened. But Casey Stengel, and he said he was asleep in a dugout or something. And
it probably was. Casey was known to doze off in the dugout.
Yeah, that's right. Great.
So I just want to remember Bill Mazur tonight, one of the pioneers in the business. Didn't mean to jump over there, you man, but I just wanted to talk about Bill for a couple of minutes. But you were saying something?
No, I think that's great. I'm glad you brought that up. Fantastic that you included that. No, I was just saying about they're changing a lot of the names in the NFL, and I do have a new name for the Washington Redskins, but I don't think they'll adopt it. So I thought maybe if they could call them the Savages, maybe that would work. But
no, they can't use that because that'd be too much of a reference to the people around the stadium.
That's stupid. Okay.
Well, guys, we're just about out of time, and thanks again to Jeffrey Payne for joining us, and G-Man as well, and I don't know what number they gave us. That was supposed to be Pat Dooley. We'll try and get him on in a future show, but either way, get the book on the Gators if you're interested out there.
We'll do our best to give him a shot next week.
Well, I'll find out from the publicist what that number is supposed to be. But, gentlemen, have a good week.
Yeah, you too. Take care, G-Man. We'll talk to you later.
All right, you guys take care now. Bye.